The topic of discussion that we are going to discuss right now is we are going to talk about micturition. So in this topic we'll be discussing about what? We'll be discussing about innervation of urinary bladder. We'll be talking about Cysto Metrogram, and then after we'll be moving toward micturition reflex. So now initially beginning with what? Beginning with our innervation of urinary bladder. Talking about innervation of urinary bladder, it consists of three supplies. The first one is parasympathetic supplies, and then after a parasympathetic, sympathetic, and we have got somatic supply. And talking about parasympathetic supply, the thing that we need to keep in our mind is, okay, here what is going on is here, right here, parasympathetic supply that we'll be talking about is we'll be talking about pelvic nerve. And talking about pelvic nerve, it consists of what? It consists of sensory fiber, and it consists of what? Motor fiber. Now this sensory fiber, these are stretch receptor, right, that carries impulse from the region of stress activation region, right? These are what? This sensory, right, and these are motor. And talking about sensory, what are these? These are stretch receptor. What are these? These are stretch receptors. And talking about motor, what are these motor? These motor are, what are these? These carries impulse, right, from what? From spinal cord into our detrusor muscle. Okay, we talked about what? We talked about parasympathetic supply, that is pelvic nerve, right? And here the origin of pelvic nerve is our what? S2 to S4, right? And its function is what? Its function is contraction of detrusor muscles, as the motor nerve is supplying right here, right? Motor nerve is supplying what? It is carrying impulse to detrusor muscle, right? And it also causes relaxation of internal sphincter muscle. Yes, okay, yes. The thing that we need to know is pelvic nerve, it consists of two parts, sensory and motor. Sensory, it carries what? Sensory impulse, right? It carries sensory impulse from our what? Stretch receptors. And what is the function of motor nerve? The function of motor nerve is to carry impulse back to our detrusor muscle. That's all. Now talking about another supply, that is our sympathetic supply. And here sympathetic supply or sympathetic fibers, these, what are these? These are our hypogastric nerve. What are these? These are our hypogastric nerve, right? Okay, parasympathetic, what does parasympathetic supply does? Parasympathetic supply, it increase or decrease our urinary outflow. It increases our urinary outflow, so that we can say that it causes stretch in our what? These detrusor muscle, and it causes relaxation of internal sphincter muscle, and that is what facilitates our urination. Okay, and talking about sympathetic supply, okay, here the thing that we need to know is we need to learn about is hypogastric nerve, and its origin is our L1 to L3, right? Now what this sympathetic, now what does it do is it supplies blood vessel, right? It supplies what? It supplies our blood vessels. It supplies our blood vessels and it is responsible for our uterorenal reflux, and that thing we'll be discussing at the end. Uterorenal reflux, right? And that is what comes under these things. It prevents retrograde ejaculation, carries painful stimulus from bladder. Okay, the thing we need to know is only this much. And talking about somatic supply, right? Somatic supply, talking about somatic supply, okay, in under the somatic supply we'll be talking about what? We'll be talking about pudendal nerve, and the origin of this pudendal nerve is our S2 to S4, right? S2 to S4. What this pudendal nerve does is, this pudendal nerve, it supplies our external sphincter, right? And it supplies our external sphincter, right? External sphincter, and that is responsible for voluntary control of micturition. What it does is voluntarily control micturition. Okay, as you can see, what it does is it causes the contraction of external sphincter muscle, right? And here this external sphincter muscle can be voluntarily controlled. Okay, that's much about what? That are about three supplies: the parasympathetic one, the sympathetic one, and somatic nerve one. Okay, now here as you can see the sympathetic one, yes, we talked about what? Sympathetic one, that was our hypogastric nerve. Its origin was from where? Its origin was from our L1 to L3, from this much region, right? This was our sympathetic. Now what it was doing, it was just supplying blood vessels that was responsible for uterorenal reflex. And similarly, talking about parasympathetic supply. Here, right here, you can see under parasympathetic supply we were talking about what? Pelvic nerve, and its origin was from S2 to S4, as you can see this region, right? And what was it doing? What it was doing, it was just having it was having innervation in our in detrusor muscle. As you can see here, it is going in the detrusor muscle area, right? But detrusor muscle area, and also these were innervating our internal sphincter muscle, right? And similarly, talking about somatic supply, and that was our pudendal nerve. As you can see, pudendal nerve, what this pudendal nerve was doing, it was supplying external sphincter, right? It was innervating external sphincter that was causing voluntary regulation of micturition. So this was about our innervation of urinary bladder. Now moving further, what we need to know is about this thing. Now what is this thing? So this is our Cysto Metrogram. What is this? This is our Cysto Metrogram. Now the thing that we need to study here is okay, what is the Cysto Metrogram? It is simply intravesical pressure versus volume curve, volume within urinary bladder. Okay, that means it is just telling the relation about pressure, and it is telling the relation about pressure versus volume, right? Pressure versus volume. Now here the pressure is in intravesical pressure within our urinary bladder, and the volume of the urine that is present in our urinary bladder. So okay, simply we know that as the volume rises, right, as the volume rises, obviously there will be increase in pressure, right? Increase in pressure. As you can see, there will be increase in pressure in the wall of our urinary bladder. So this diagram depicts the relation between the intravesical pressure and another the volume of urine within our urinary bladder. So as you can see, there are three phases right here. Okay, let's see this diagram. Initially there are three phases. The first one is IA, first A, this is first B, and this is it is second. And after this second phase, there will be the initiation of micturition reflux, right? Micturition reflux will initiate after this second phase. So this is the order. Okay, now talking about the first A, right? Now what is this first A? This first A is the condition, right? It is the initial segment. Now here what will happen is that there will be straight rise. What will happen? There will be straight rise in intravesicular pressure. Intravesicular pressure will be raised straightly, right? It will rise straight, right, for about 100 ml of blood. Okay, here it is shown in this region, but it should be right here. For about 100 ml of urine volume, there will be straight rise in pressure, and that is what we call initial segment. Now talking about another segment, that is first B. Now talking about this first B, as you can see, there is no rise in intravesicular pressure, right? There is no rise in intravesical pressure with increase in about 100 to 400 ml of blood. Okay, that means it is it is flat segment. What is this first B called? It is called flat segment. Now here there will be very little rise in intravesicular pressure. Okay, the diagram is not this straight as it is shown right here, as it is mentioned in guidon. It is like this, right? As you can see, with about from 100 to 400 ml, as you can see, with increase in volume from 100 to 400 ml, there is slight increase in intravesicular pressure, and that is called flat segment. Very little rise in intravesicular pressure despite large rise in intravesical volume up to 400 ml. So this was it. And talking about another phase, and that is second phase, and the second phase is our sharp rise. As you can see right here, after this 400 ml, you can see there is sharp rise, and this is sharp rise, the second phase after volume exceeds 400 ml, right? There will be there will be onset of micturition reflex, and this indicates this one. Okay, now let's move toward the content. Yes, here volume pressure. Okay, it is what we're talking about. We're talking about Cysto Metrogram. It is volume pressure change in urinary bladder, and it is plotted by Cysto Metrogram. And there are three segments. The first one is start of feeling. That is that is initial segment, and it is there will be there will be small increase in pressure, right, straight, there will be small increase in pressure with with about 100 ml of rise in volume of urine. And talking about first B, it is flat line, right, it is flat line, as you can see right here, flat line. And here what is happening, the pressure is being maintained, right, and it is it is supported by Laplace law. As we know, the tension is equal to what, pressure times radius, right, pressure times radius. As okay, it is okay, here what is going on is, here as you can see, as as volume increases, right, okay, this is our this is our urinary bladder, and after volume, after filling or after increasing volume, what will happen, it will be like this, right, as it will be like this, as you can see, okay, as okay, it was initial and it was final. As you can see, the radius also increases here, right, as there will be rise in radius, right, rise in radius, our Laplace law, what it says, that tension is equal to pressure times what, radius. As you can see, there is rise in radius right here, right, rise in radius. As this rise in radius will be balanced by what, increase in radius will be balanced by our pressure. We can say pressure is 2 times tension upon radius. As you can see, there is rise in radius, right, rise in volume. What will happen, as there will be rise in our denominator, this will be decreased, so it is balanced in such a way. Okay, now talking about the second phase. Okay, talking about the second phase, there is sharp rise in pressure, right, there is, and that will result in micturition. The first to void is our 150 ml, and there will be marked sense of fullness when there will be 400 ml of urine in our urinary bladder. So this was what this was about, Cysto Metrogram. Now moving further, what we need to know is, we need to talk about in detail about micturition reflex. What we're talking about, what we're going to talk about, micturition reflex. Micturition reflex. Now here the thing that we need to know here is, it is self regenerative mechanism. What I'm saying is, it is what, it is self regenerative mechanism. What is this? This is our self regenerative Now why it is self regenerative? Because once it is formed, right, once there will be initiation of our what, micturition reflex, once micturition reflex begins, it is what, it will just again and again form itself, right, it will again and again form itself. That is why it is called self regenerative process, and it is what, it is under the control of autonomic spinal cord reflex, or it is what, it is autonomic spinal cord reflex. Why we are saying it? Because it is not controlled by, it is not largely controlled by our what, higher reflexes, right, it carries impulse to spinal cord, there will be the decision, and again the impulse will come back to the region. So but there are also what, it is also facilitated by facilitated and innervated by higher centers, such as what, such as our what, higher center. It is facilitated and innervated by higher centers such as brain stem, right, brain stem. It is important to know, because when we will draw a flow chart of our micturition reflex, at that time these things will come. Brain stem, under that brain stems, it is mainly present in the case of our pons. And similarly, moving further, we have cerebral cortex also, right, cerebral cortex is also there. Okay, now talking about the flow chart. Okay, now let's move toward the flow chart. Now talking about the flow chart, the thing is, what is going on is, there is feeling of bladder is going on. As there will be feeling of bladder, what will happen is that, as we have said at the time of what, innervation of urinary bladder, that the sensory stress receptors are there, right, sensory, and feeling of bladder will cause what, it will cause sensory stress receptor activation, right. As sensory stress receptor will be activated, what will happen, right, the sensory nerve, which are the part of pelvic nerve, if you remember, under what, we studied pelvic nerve under parasympathetic nerves, right, as you know, we studied these things right here, parasympathetic nerve. When that, under that we talked about pelvic nerve, and under that pelvic nerve we talked about sensory nerve, that was carrying what, impulse from stretch receptors, right? Okay, right here what is going on is that there is stress receptor activation, and this stress receptor activation, right, they send what impulse through sensory nerves, and these sensory nerves are the part of what pelvic nerve. So pelvic nerve will carry sensory stimulation, or what sensory nerve of what our this pelvic nerve will carry the sensation, and it will be taken to spinal cord, and from that spinal cord what will happen, there will be motor nerve of pelvic motor fiber of our what pelvic nerve, obviously that is what motor nerve of pelvic nerve, right, motor fiber, let's say motor fiber. Okay, we're talking about pelvic nerve only, and the sensory nerve of pelvic the sensory fiber of pelvic nerve was what it was carrying, and the impulse from what the sensory stress receptors, and it was taken to spinal cord, and from spinal cord the motor nerve will just carry it back into the region. Now what will happen is that this motor nerve will carry the impulse to what detrusor muscle, and here there will be detrusor muscle contraction. Because of that thing there will be detrusor muscle contraction, and here now as there will be detrusor muscle contraction, now there will be two things. Now when at the time of this detrusor muscle contraction, the bladder is at one condition there will be partial filling of bladder, that means it will be less than 300 to 400 ml. So bladder partially filling of bladder partially filled, that means how much? That means less than 300 ml to 400 ml, right? Now another condition is the condition in which there will be what? There will be bladder fully filled, or we can say completely filled, and it will be the condition in which there will be more than 300 ml to 400 ml of filling of blood. So now what is going on is that as there will be partial filling of blood, the contraction are not so powerful. The contraction are not powerful, that means the waves are not that powerful. Contraction are not that powerful, right? Powerful. Okay, now as the contraction are not that powerful, because okay, now here since the bladder is fully filled or completely filled, what will happen? The contraction are powerful, right? The contraction are powerful. As the contraction are powerful, what will happen right here is there will be inhibition of higher center, right? Inhibition of higher center. As there will be inhibition in higher center, what will happen? As there will be inhibition in higher center, it will cause inhibition of what external sphincter, right? It will cause inhibition of external sphincter. Now we are talking about external sphincter right here, but before that there is already contraction of what? Our detrusor muscle, and detrusor muscle contraction is there, but it was not enough in this case, but it was enough in this case. That means here the bladder was fully filled, there was enough contraction of detrusor muscle, there was relaxation of internal sphincter muscle, but the problem that was occurring was in the case of external sphincter, right? But here as the detrusor muscle is fully filled or completely filled, now what will happen? The contraction is so powerful, there will be inhibition, right? There will be inhibition created by higher center that we discussed earlier. The higher center are what? The center present in brainstem, mainly in pons, cerebral cortex, right? Now as there will be the inhibition created by higher center, there will be inhibition in external sphincter muscle, right? And that now there will not be voluntary control of urination also. So what will happen is that there will be urination. Now what will happen? There will be urination. So this was about what? This was about our micturition reflex. So I hope you got it. So this was all about what? Our micturations.